Welcome to Red Book Insider, where we bring you powerful books that can change the way you think, work, and live. Today's video dives into timeless lessons you can start applying right away. And if you'd like to grab your own copy of the book, there's a link in the description. Have you ever wondered why painful memories don't just fade away even years later? Why someone who went through a terrifying event can feel like it's happening all over again, just from a sound, a smell, or even a single word? That's exactly where Bessel van der Kolk begins his groundbreaking book, The Body Keeps the Score. He shows us that trauma is not just about bad memories. It's about how the brain and body hold on to those experiences, even when our conscious mind wants to move on. Dr. van der Kolk has spent decades working with trauma survivors, soldiers returning from war, children who grew up in unsafe homes, and ordinary people who went through accidents, assaults, or sudden losses. And what he found is striking. Trauma reshapes both the mind and the body. It changes how people think, how they react, and even how they connect to others. Here's the shocking truth. Trauma isn't just an emotional scar. It's something that rewires the brain's alarm system. Normally, the brain tells us when danger is gone, and we can relax. But for someone with trauma, that switch often breaks. Their body acts like the threat is still happening, flooding them with stress hormones, tightening their muscles, and keeping them on constant high alert. This explains why survivors often feel trapped in cycles of fear, anger, or numbness. They're not broken. Their brain is just doing its best to keep them safe, but in a way that backfires. Dr. van der Kolk also explains how trauma fragments memory. Instead of being stored like a normal story with a beginning, middle, and end, traumatic events often get stuck in the body as flashes, sensations, or raw emotions. That's why someone might not even remember an event clearly, but still feel sick or panicked when triggered. One of the most powerful points in this first section is that trauma is not only carried in the mind, it lives in the body. Headaches, stomach problems, unexplained pain, and emotional numbness can all be signs of the body holding on to unprocessed trauma. And here's the hook. Traditional talk therapy often falls short because you can't simply reason your way out of these body reactions. Healing trauma requires approaches that also work with the body, not just the mind. So by the end of this first part, we're left with a haunting realization. The past doesn't just live in our memories, it echoes in our nervous system, our posture, our breath, and our relationships. But here's the question we'll explore in the next part. If trauma takes root in both the brain and body, how can we actually break free from its grip? When we think about trauma, most people imagine it as a memory, like a bad movie replaying in the mind. But Dr. Bessel van der Kolk shows us something far more startling. Trauma actually reshapes the brain itself. It doesn't just sit in the background, it rewires how we think, feel, and even how we react in everyday life. Let's break this down. The brain has three key areas that are deeply affected by trauma. 1. The reptilian brain, survival mode. This is the oldest part of the brain, responsible for instincts like breathing, heartbeat, and fight or flight reactions. Trauma supercharges this area, keeping the body on high alert. It's like living with an alarm bell that never stops ringing. 2. The limbic system, emotional brain. This part processes emotions and memories. The amygdala, a tiny almond-shaped structure, becomes hyperactive after trauma. That's why survivors often overreact to minor stress. They're not overly sensitive, their amygdala is simply firing too intensely, as if danger is always around the corner. 3. The prefrontal cortex, thinking brain. This is the rational, decision-making part that helps us plan, reflect, and calm ourselves down. Trauma weakens it. So when a trigger appears, logic often shuts down, and raw survival instincts take over. This explains why people may feel out of control during flashbacks or panic attacks. Dr. van der Kolk describes this as a hijacking of the brain. Imagine trying to drive a car, but every time you pass a stoplight, the brakes or accelerator slam on by themselves. That's what living with trauma feels like. Your brain's control systems are disrupted, leaving you reacting to things you can't always explain. One haunting finding he shares is that trauma often disconnects people from the part of the brain that creates a clear narrative of experience. That means survivors may have trouble putting their feelings into words. Instead, they experience trauma as raw sensations, a racing heart, tight chest, or sudden dizziness, without knowing why. This leads to a powerful truth. Trauma survivors aren't broken or weak. Their brains have adapted to survive overwhelming stress. It's not a failure, it's biology doing its best under impossible conditions. But here's the tricky part. What helps in a moment of danger, hyper-awareness, quick reactions, emotional shutdown, can become harmful when the danger is gone. Imagine being wired for battle, but now you're just trying to live daily life. That's the painful trap of post-traumatic stress. The good news? Dr. van der Kolk reminds us that the brain is not fixed. It can change. Just as trauma rewires the brain for fear, healing experiences can rewire it for safety and connection. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new pathways, gives us hope that recovery is possible. But how do we actually move from survival brain back to healing brain? Talk therapy alone often isn't enough because trauma isn't stored as a neat story. It's stored as fragments, sensations, and body memories. And that's the cliffhanger. In the next part, we'll uncover how the body itself remembers what the mind cannot, and why paying attention to the body is the key to unlocking deep healing. If you've ever heard the phrase, "trust your gut," you'll understand this chapter on a whole new level. Dr. van der Kolk shows that trauma doesn't just stay in the brain, it gets stored in the body itself. Think of someone who jumps at the sound of fireworks, or someone who suddenly feels sick to their stomach when they smell a certain cologne. These aren't random reactions, they're body memories. The nervous system remembers what the mind can't always put into words. Here's why. When trauma happens, the rational brain often shuts down, while the survival brain and body take over. Instead of a clear memory, the body records trauma as tension, heart rate spikes, or frozen muscles. Years later, those same reactions can resurface without warning. This explains why survivors often describe feeling unsafe in their own bodies. The body itself becomes the battlefield, holding trapped energy, fear, or numbness. Some may feel constantly on edge, while others feel disconnected and out of their skin. Dr. van der Kolk introduces the idea of body awareness as the first step toward healing. Practices like yoga, mindfulness, and breathwork can help people tune into these physical sensations rather than ignoring or fearing them. By gently noticing what the body feels, tight shoulders, shallow breath, a racing heart, survivors can begin to release the trauma locked inside. He also shares research showing that trauma survivors often have irregular heart rhythms, disrupted sleep cycles, and high levels of stress hormones. It's as if their body is running a marathon, even while sitting still. No wonder they feel exhausted, anxious, or physically unwell. One powerful story involves veterans who struggled to sit still in talk therapy but found relief through yoga. The physical movements gave them a sense of control and grounding that words alone could not. It's a reminder that healing often requires us to work with the body, not against it. Here's the big takeaway. While the mind might forget or block traumatic experiences, the body never lies. It carries the imprint of every shock, every loss, every danger we've faced. And until we pay attention to the body, real healing can't begin. But this raises the next big question. If trauma reshapes both the brain and the body, how does it affect our relationships, our sense of safety, and even our ability to love? At its core, being human means connecting with family, friends, partners, and communities. But trauma has a cruel way of stealing that ability. Dr. van der Kolk explains that trauma isolates. Survivors often feel cut off, not only from others, but from themselves. Why? Because when the body is stuck in survival mode, it's hard to relax enough to trust, love, or play. Many trauma survivors describe feeling numb, detached, or not fully alive. They might avoid intimacy, struggle with friendships, or feel like outsiders in their own families. Even when surrounded by people, they may feel profoundly alone. Science helps explain this. Trauma disrupts the brain's social engagement system, the network that allows us to make eye contact, read facial expressions, and feel safe with others. Instead of calm connection, the body interprets closeness as potential danger. This is especially true for childhood trauma. Children who grow up in chaotic or unsafe homes often learn to shut down emotionally to survive. As adults, they may crave love, but fear it at the same time. But here's the hopeful side. Connection is also the antidote to trauma. Safe, supportive relationships are one of the most powerful healing tools available. When someone feels truly seen and accepted, their nervous system begins to relax, sending signals of safety through the body. Dr. Kolk shares heartwarming examples of group therapies, theater programs, and community activities where survivors rediscovered joy through connection. By laughing, moving, and creating together, they rebuilt trust in ways that no lecture or medication could achieve. The key lesson: trauma damages relationships, but relationships can also repair trauma. Healing often begins not in isolation, but in community. But this leads us to another big piece of the puzzle. If talking isn't always enough, what other methods actually help rewire the brain and body for safety? For decades, traditional talk therapy was the main approach to trauma. But here's the catch. Trauma isn't stored as neat words and stories. It's stored in fragmented memories, body sensations, and emotions. That's why survivors often say, "I don't have the words." Dr. Kolk highlights that while talking can help, it often doesn't reach the deepest wounds. Survivors may understand their trauma intellectually, yet still feel stuck emotionally and physically. So what works? He introduces a variety of groundbreaking methods: eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR, a therapy that uses eye movements or tapping to help the brain reprocess traumatic memories. Many survivors find their emotional intensity drops dramatically after EMDR. Neurofeedback, a method that teaches people to regulate their own brainwaves, calming overactive fear circuits and strengthening self-control. Yoga and mindfulness, physical practices that reconnect survivors with their bodies, teaching them to notice sensations without fear. Theater and play, creative approaches where survivors act out roles, express emotions, and rediscover spontaneity and joy. What ties these methods together is this: they engage the body, not just the mind. Instead of only asking, "What happened to you?" they also ask, "What does your body feel? What can your body do now to feel safe again?" This shift from words to experiences is at the heart of true healing. Survivors don't just need to remember differently. They need to live differently, feeling safe and present in their own skin. But here's a lingering question. If healing requires such active body-based approaches, what role do medications play in trauma recovery? When someone goes to a doctor for trauma-related struggles, nightmares, panic attacks, depression, or anxiety, the first response is often to write a prescription. Pills for sleep, pills for mood, pills for anxiety. And yes, medication can sometimes help calm the storm. But Dr. Bessel Kolk raises an important question. Do medications actually heal trauma, or do they just quiet the symptoms? To understand this, we need to look at what trauma really does. Trauma doesn't just create sad thoughts or nervous feelings, it rewires the brain and body. The amygdala goes into overdrive, the prefrontal cortex shuts down, and the nervous system keeps pumping out stress hormones like cortisol. That means trauma isn't just an issue of brain chemicals being too low or too high. It's a full-body memory system gone out of balance. So where does medication fit? Dr. Kolk acknowledges that antidepressants and anti-anxiety drugs can sometimes reduce the intensity of symptoms. They can help people sleep better, stabilize mood swings, or take the edge off overwhelming panic. For someone drowning in flashbacks, medication may feel like a life raft, giving enough stability to function day to day. But here's the catch. While medications can numb symptoms, they rarely resolve trauma. A pill can't teach the body how to feel safe again. It doesn't repair broken trust, restore lost connection, or release the fear stored in muscle tension and heart rhythms. It's like putting a bandage over a wound that needs deeper treatment. It covers, but it doesn't cure. Another concern is that some medications can actually blunt emotions too much. Trauma survivors already struggle with numbness and disconnection. If a drug flattens their feelings even further, it can create distance from the very emotions they need to process in order to heal. Imagine trying to work through grief or anger while feeling half asleep inside. It can keep recovery stuck. This doesn't mean medication is useless. Dr. van der Kolk stresses that medicine has a role, especially when someone is in crisis. The key is balance. Medication may open the door by calming symptoms, but real healing requires walking through that door into therapies that engage the body, mind, and community. Think of medicine as the scaffolding, not the finished building. So where does science leave us? We've learned that trauma is too complex for a one-size-fits-all solution. Healing isn't about finding the pill. It's about a combination of tools, body-based practices, safe relationships, creative expression, and sometimes, yes, carefully chosen medication. And that leads to a bigger, more inspiring truth. If the brain and body can be reshaped by trauma, they can also be reshaped by healing experiences. Which brings us to the most moving part of the book, stories of real people who overcame unimaginable pain and discovered resilience they never knew they had. After chapters of science and theory, Dr. van der Kolk gives us what we've been waiting for: hope. He shares story after story of people who lived through unbearable trauma and still found a way to reclaim joy, purpose, and connection. One story is of a war veteran who couldn't escape the battlefield in his mind. Loud noises would send him diving for cover, and nightmares robbed him of sleep. Talk therapy didn't work. Words weren't enough. But through yoga and breathing practices, he learned to calm his nervous system, to feel his body without fear. Slowly, his nights became peaceful and his days less haunted. Another story tells of a woman who endured years of childhood abuse. For decades, she carried silence and shame, believing her voice didn't matter. Then, through a community theater program, she began performing on stage. By stepping into roles, she rediscovered her own voice. For the first time, she stood tall in front of an audience and felt powerful instead of powerless. Children too find healing in surprising ways. Dr. van der Kolk describes kids from violent homes who struggled with behavior and learning. Instead of punishment, they were given art, play, and safe mentors. The result? Their nervous systems began to settle, their focus improved, and joy returned to their faces. What's striking in all these stories is not that trauma vanished. It didn't. The memories remained. But the survivors' relationship to those memories transformed. Instead of being controlled by flashbacks, they carried their past with new meaning. They weren't defined by trauma. They were defined by resilience. A common theme runs through every recovery story: empowerment. Healing wasn't about someone else fixing them. It was about them reclaiming their own body, voice, and sense of control. Trauma steals power. Healing restores it. And here's the inspiring truth: resilience is not rare. It's built into the human spirit. When given the right tools, safety, support, and creativity, people can grow stronger at the broken places. But Dr. van der Kolk doesn't stop with individuals. He challenges us to think bigger. What if entire communities could heal trauma together? What if schools, workplaces, and families learned how to nurture resilience instead of passing down cycles of pain? When we think about trauma, we often see it as an individual wound, something that belongs to one person's past. But Dr. Bessel van der Kolk urges us to zoom out. Trauma is not just personal. It ripples outward into families, schools, workplaces, and even entire nations. If left unhealed, trauma becomes a hidden engine that drives cycles of violence, addiction, and disconnection across society. Consider a child who grows up in a household filled with yelling, neglect, or violence. That child's nervous system learns to stay on constant alert. Without support, they may carry that hypervigilance into adulthood, struggling with relationships, battling addiction, or even repeating the same behaviors they once suffered from. Multiply this by millions of households, and suddenly trauma is not just private pain, it's a public health crisis. But here's the hopeful side. Just as trauma can spread, so can healing. A veteran who learns to calm his body through yoga doesn't just help himself. He becomes a safer, more present father, husband, and friend. A mother who learns self-regulation after childhood abuse can raise children who feel secure instead of afraid. Every act of healing strengthens the community around it. Dr. van der Kolk calls for society to take this seriously. Instead of pouring endless money into punishment systems like prisons, we should be investing in trauma-informed schools, community programs, and healthcare. Imagine classrooms where kids learn mindfulness, body awareness, and emotional regulation alongside math and reading. Imagine neighborhoods with safe spaces for art, theater, and play, where people of all ages can reconnect with joy. Imagine doctors trained not only to prescribe pills, but to recognize and treat the hidden wounds of trauma. The truth is, trauma is not rare. It's woven into the human story. But too often we treat its survivors with judgment instead of compassion. We label them broken, lazy, or difficult, when in reality they are carrying burdens their bodies never had the chance to release. What would change if society shifted from blame to understanding? The message of this chapter is clear. If we want healthier communities, safer relationships, and stronger futures, we must recognize trauma and prioritize healing. This isn't just about helping individuals, it's about shaping the world we all live in. And that raises the biggest question of all. If trauma shapes both individuals and society, what practical steps can each of us take, whether as parents, teachers, friends, or citizens, to break the cycle? At this point in the journey, we've learned how trauma reshapes the brain, how the body remembers what the mind forgets, and how healing requires more than words. But now the book gets very practical. What can we do in daily life to begin rewriting the body's score? Dr. van der Kolk highlights a variety of tools, simple yet powerful practices that anyone can explore. 1. Mindfulness and breathwork. Trauma often traps people in the past. Mindfulness gently anchors them back into the present. By focusing on the breath, noticing sensations, and observing thoughts without judgment, survivors begin to calm their racing nervous system. Something as small as 5 minutes of mindful breathing each day can create new neural pathways of calm. 2. Yoga and body awareness. Movement is medicine. Yoga is particularly effective because it combines gentle stretching with deep breathing and awareness of the body. Trauma survivors who feel unsafe in their own skin can slowly relearn that their body is not the enemy. Even noticing how feet feel against the floor or how breath fills the lungs can begin to restore safety. 3. Journaling and storytelling. For those who can't always speak about their trauma, writing becomes a lifeline. Journaling allows survivors to process memories at their own pace, turning fragmented sensations into a narrative they can control. Over time, this helps the brain integrate the experience instead of being ambushed by it. 4. Art, music, and theater. Creativity bypasses the rational brain and goes straight to the emotional core. Drawing, painting, dancing, or acting lets survivors express feelings that words can't capture. One theater program described in the book allowed people to step into roles that gave them new courage and perspective. 5. Safe relationships and community. Perhaps the most healing force of all is connection. Trauma isolates, but safe relationships repair. Whether it's a trusted friend, a therapist, or a supportive group, survivors need spaces where they feel seen without judgment. In those spaces, the nervous system can finally relax. 6. Therapies like EMDR and neurofeedback. These innovative methods help the brain reprocess trauma and regulate itself. EMDR, for example, uses eye movements to unlock frozen memories, while neurofeedback trains the brain to shift out of panic mode. The key theme here is empowerment. Healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about giving survivors tools to live fully in the present, no longer hostage to what happened. The tools don't have to be dramatic. They just have to be consistent. Small steps, practiced over time, can rewire the brain and restore the body's sense of safety. But here's the cliffhanger. As powerful as these individual tools are, the ultimate lesson of the body keeps the score goes even deeper. Healing trauma isn't just about surviving. It's about rediscovering joy, purpose, and connection that trauma tried to steal. We've reached the end of this journey, and it's time to pull the threads together. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's message is both sobering and hopeful. Trauma is real. Its scars run deep, and it changes both brain and body. But healing is possible, because our brains are adaptable, our bodies are resilient, and our spirits are stronger than we think. Throughout the book, we've seen how trauma hijacks the brain, fragments memory, and traps survivors in cycles of fear or numbness. We've seen how it disrupts relationships, isolates individuals, and spreads pain through families and communities. But we've also seen how healing can unfold through yoga, mindfulness, creativity, EMDR, safe relationships, and supportive communities. The final insight is this: healing is not about going back to who we were before trauma. That's impossible. Instead, it's about becoming someone new, someone who carries their scars with wisdom, who transforms pain into compassion, and who finds strength in the very places that once felt broken. On a larger scale, the book calls on all of us, teachers, parents, doctors, leaders, friends, to recognize trauma not as a weakness, but as part of the human story. When we respond with understanding instead of judgment, we create a world where healing is not only possible, but inevitable. So, what does it mean that the body keeps the score? It means our past is written into our muscles, our breath, our heartbeat. But the hopeful twist is this: we can write new chapters. We can train our nervous systems to find calm, our hearts to trust again, and our communities to nurture safety and connection. The closing takeaway is powerful. The body remembers, but it also heals. The past shapes us, but it doesn't have to define us. Each of us has the capacity to transform trauma into resilience, pain into purpose, and survival into thriving. And that wraps up our complete 10-part journey through The Body Keeps the Score. If this series gave you insight or hope, hit that like button, share it with someone who might need it, and don't forget to subscribe for more life-changing book breakdowns. And if you want to dive deeper, I've left the link to get your own copy in the description below. Remember, healing is possible, and your story is still being written. Thank you for watching.